Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. Noir November, bleeding into December, now stumbling dead into January, is here with a discussion about the previously slept on film Zodiac. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead. This is the Sweet Tea speaking. Welcome back.
Oh my god.
Well,
my god.
I feel like it would have been better though if you had said it. I feel like this is the whiskey speaking. Sounds better. I don't know. That's just me though.
Whiskey speaking. Who else is tired? What a year it's been. My goodness.
I'm tired, but I kind of don't want the year to end. But that's just me.
I'm pretty sure you're not the only one. 'Cause when it ends, the next one begins.
The drama,
and
the excitement, the unknown.
As a young Anakin Skywalker once said, this is where the fun begins.
Oh, God. Hopefully.
Of course, sarcastically. But before we get into the fun of this episode, we are going to talk a little bit about the whole Glicked thing, because it's probably the last significant... Like, obviously, we've got Oscar season is right around the corner. Like, 12 movies are all coming out on Christmas Day. But before, like, as far as, like, end-of-the-year movie news, I feel like it was kind of the most significant thing that's happened, even though it's been, like, a month as of this recording. But, you know, I just thought it'd be worth talking about, because it was kind of a big deal. So... Obviously, I'm sure everyone listening knows the whole Glicked thing. Basically, they were trying to kind of copy the whole Barbenheimer thing from last year.
Right.
And it is funny, I'll give it that. But, like, so, leading up to Glicked, whether it is a thing or not, both of these movies, it was reported on everywhere just like how crazy expensive the marketing was. A lot of people I have talked to straight up didn't even want to see Wicked because they were so sick of seeing stuff like on TV.
Oh my god, right.
Like all the interviews and stuff. And I kind of get that. And apparently like Gladiator 2, I didn't see as many ads for it, but apparently it was like playing before sports games all the time and whatever.
That would be their target demographic, so that makes sense.
But both of them did really, really, really well, especially opening weekend. Wicked was the third biggest domestic debut. Did I forget to write something? Man, so it's the fourth biggest for a musical, and it's the first biggest for a Broadway adaptation. And it had 400 brand partnerships.
Oh my god.
And for it becoming the first... biggest domestic opening for opening in general for a Broadway film adaptation. It actually dethroned Into the Woods, which had dethroned Les Mis, which that's crazy. I didn't realize Into the Woods was that big, but I guess it was looking back.
I just remember it coming and going. By the way, I think what you meant to say was Wicked is the third biggest opening of the year, behind Inside Out.
That's okay. That's why I didn't write it down. That's why I didn't write that down. Yeah, so third biggest domestic debut period this year. So third highest grossing for like an opening day for this year, which is saying something. We've had some big things here. And the 400 brand partnerships blew my mind. I've been doing a lot of Target runs. Fun fact for all you listeners, I'm actually in a new location. So I've been going back and forth to Target because of my move. And I saw lots of Wicked stuff for the kiddos and the ladies right at the opening there. And then Gladiator 2... let's see. So for the marketing for this, I couldn't find hard numbers for Wicked's marketing, but the 400 brand partnerships is enough for me to be like, holy crap.
Yeah, that speaks a lot to it.
Almost half of Gladiator 2's budget went to marketing. So its budget period was $250 million, but they spent $100 million to market the film. And even though Wicked just did gangbusters here domestically, in the global marketplace, everywhere, like in all the countries, Gladiator 2 had the highest global box office for that day. So I think the marketing worked, and people are like saying like, oh, is this how you have to market a movie now? I think one thing I have been harping on all this year. Let's go back in time, T. Let's go back in time about 6 months.
Okay.
Do you remember how much people, or at least the movie press, were talking about, is this the death of cinema? Is cinema dead? Are people even going to go to the movie theater anymore? And I was kind of being skeptical about it. This is not the first time I brought this up this year. And hopefully I won't bring it up as much next year, because hopefully the film press will shut up about this, because I thought it was stupid months ago, and I think it's very stupid now. We have had a year. I've talked about the quality of the films, but like right off the bat, in February, Dune 2 came out and was nearing like $1 billion. I don't know if it got that far, but that's pretty dang good for like a weird, long, like sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
And then during the summer we had Twisters, we had Alien Romulus, we had all of these. Yeah, Deadpool 3, here we go. I wrote down Inside Out 2 is now the highest grossing animated film of all time. I already mentioned Twisters. Like, after just hit after hit, I'm sure I'm probably not the only person who feels like this year has been a really good year for movies, but it's really speaking volumes at the box office, because the last several years we've had big hits. Obviously, Barbenheimer last year, both of those films did super well.
Right.
But just the volume of movies doing well this year, because that's also just the cream of the crop. There have been successful movies, like one that I really enjoyed was like the Wild Robot.
Oh my god! Yes.
I'm sure I could go through. I'm sure I could go through like my list of things we're going to talk about on the finale, and I could bring up other movies that did well at the box office. But do you think we will finally stop hearing about the death of cinema or the death of the movie theater? Because at this point I feel like it's almost stupid to keep harping on about it like it's something that's happening. I do think the landscape has changed quite a bit, but the idea that like no one is going out to see movies anymore, I think that's pretty provably false at this point. What do you think?
I don't think where this is going to be the end of us hearing about this. It's kind of along the lines of the same narrative of the nobody wants to work anymore thing that we hear all the time. And then I forget who it was, and if I remembered who they were, I could probably Google it right now. Let me see if it pops up. But they did a whole backstory on the whole nobody wants to work anymore thing, and there's headlines about it. Going back, I think like to the 1800s, they went and they pulled stuff. So it's like it's like another thing, but it's kind of just like anytime anything changes, everybody acts like it's the end of the world. Movies have changed. And it's become inexplicably intertwined with cinema. So it's changed and we have to adapt. And instead of like writing about how we can adapt, everybody wants to write the, oh my God, it's the death of cinema, story that they know people will click on and read. But, it's like after a certain point, it's just like no one really cares more. Clearly that's incorrect, because if we'd listened to every time they said cinema was dying or something of the last few years, none of these theater chains would be left. So I don't think it's the last we're going to hear of it. But I think much like
you're probably
said,
right.
It's demonstrably false.
Yeah, and you're probably right. The thing with me, I think at this point we can safely say we are very far out of the pandemic and lockdown. It was like a slow thing, it all happened, and then after it happened, people were afraid to go to large enclosed spaces with a bunch of dirty, filthy people, which was understandable. I remember being a little nervous when I was going back into the movie theater, and also like you still had to wear a mask going to a movie theater for a while, which is crazy. Like, I thinking back a few years, it's like, oh my God, that's right. I saw the Batman in like the first Dune movie wearing a mask, which is crazy to think about. But I think that played a bit of a part in it. And also, let's not forget that a lot of these films have been kind of sitting on the shelf. Like, they didn't release some stuff because of lockdown, and like, you know, and things were postponed. Let's also not forget one of our big stories from last year was the writer's strike. That was a whole thing. So I agree, but I also think that part of this hysteria around this has to do with the fact that people weren't going to the movies for a while, and they were kind of thinking, is this just going to be the new normal, that people don't want to because it's easier to stream things. And I think I even said this one of the times that we were talking about this topic in one of our past episodes this year, but a lot of people want to go to the movie theater for big movies like Wicked or Furiosa or like, you know, you're not as well as A24 movies do. That's not sort of the thing that people feel they need the epicness of the movie theater to enjoy.
Right. And I think that's basically where the change is, where essentially you used to go to the movies for everything. You do just, the types of films they put out into theaters do need to be changed to justify the cost. Yeah. And it's like, it's exactly. Just with inflation and like, and I've probably said stuff against this before, but if you really think about it, movies, cinema, like any other industry, is just like fashion. You know, one day you're in, the next day you're out, to quote Project Runway. But it's basically that with styles. It's like what the trendy new style is going to be the one that people are going to flock to see, whether or not you do that super artistically and self-indulgently, or, you know, you just throw something together quickly. That's what people flock to see. Then they'll eventually tire of that, and then they'll latch on to what the new, you know, trend is. And unfortunately, a lot of times we don't know what the trend is until we're in the middle of it.
Exactly. And I will say, I do think these movies were probably going to do well no matter what the marketing was, but at least the marketing was justified by how much money they made. Like, on one hand, you've got the biggest musical of the 2000s being adapted to film, and you have a director who's been proven to be good at the medium with In the Heights, and just a good director in general with Crazy Rich Asians. I love that movie.
Right.
And I didn't realize it was the same guy until like after. And then you've got Gladiator 2, you've got the director returning. The first one, I think I mentioned, which is a
double-edged sword, to be honest, but go on.
Kind of. The first one is, honestly, I rewatched it about a year ago. I think it might have been like closer to January or something, but I was just scrolling Netflix, it was on, and I was like, oh man, I haven't seen this since I was a teenager. I wonder if it holds up. And, you know, I'll get into my review of Gladiator 2 in the next episode, but the first one genuinely is one of the best movies ever. Like, going back to it, I see why, you know, it was such a big deal when it came out. And it did kind of pave the way for a lot of medieval warfare in later films. Like, I feel like the film that kind of preceded it was like Braveheart, and then it kind of took the torch and moved it along. And then a few years after that, you know, you had like Lord of the Rings and stuff, but it did a lot of things that kind of furthered the medium, and it was sort of that dragon that Ridley Scott's been chasing ever since. So it had a lot to live up to, but just because of the reputation of the first one, I think a lot of people were going to see it anyway, regardless of whether it was good or whether they thought it was good, because they want to see if it's going to suck. You know what I mean? And that too, it also had kind of that oddity of being a sequel that's coming out like 24 years after the first one, which is always really weird when that happens.
Well, I mean, like, I will say the only reason it came out was for two reasons. One, they know they could capitalize on the intellectual property. People would see it. And two, like you said, Ridley Scott's been trying to prove that he can still direct, even though like his last, like, what, 3 or 4 films have been total failures.
And it's incredibly funny to me that this one did so well, because it's almost like, and I've said this before, I've watched a couple of his movies.
Didn't he complain about remakes? Didn't he complain about sequels at some point? I think he did. I'm pretty sure
he definitely has. But that's kind of why I find it so funny. It's like, technically, some of his movies he's made recently are better than Gladiator 2. But it goes to show, I've said this before and I'll say it again, it is frustrating that all we get most of the time are sequels and remakes, but it's because we buy it, you know? Like, you can get mad at the movie going public, or you can get mad at people producing the same crap over and over again, but it's our own fault. At the end of the day, we're the ones paying to see the same thing over and over again because it continues to do well. And that is basically, I think, the lesson with Gladiator 2. It's like, it whether it's good or not, like, people, like, if Gladiator 3 comes out next year, if it sucks, people are still going to go flock to see it.
I'm waiting to see it until we have Gladiator Takes Manhattan.
But we also can't talk about the marketing without talking about all of the cringe and the drama with the Wicked press tour and all of that. I definitely need to get your opinion on it, because there's a couple of things that happened.
To be fair, the drama with the Wicked marketing and stuff started like a year or two ago, when it found out that what's-his-face, who plays Bach, like, left his wife to be with Ariana Grande, and then everybody was hating on her and saying she's not a girl's girl and that she had a history of doing this.
And I forgot that... Well, I forgot that is why they met. I remember, like, obviously I knew about that, and that story, frankly, kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But when I saw Wicked, I was like, oh my god, wait, it's SpongeBob. Yes. Oh my god, this is how that happened.
Right, so...
oh my god.
Already going into the press cycle for the movie when it actually come out, you know, people were kind of, like, apprehensive about it, and then Ariana Grande, you know, put out her album Eternal Sunshine with that one song Yes and, which also kind of rubbed people the wrong way too, but then people got really on board with her album, they liked it, so it's kind of like they forgave her or they moved on, so that was going in. But then her and Cynthia and all these interviews have just been weird. And it's like,
dude,
they're just they're like nonstop gushing over each other, which is fine, but it's like at a point to where it's like, how real is this? And then of course there's the iconic
crying,
the crying.
I've seen so many. And it's not even just them. I've seen so many interviewers start breakdown crying. Like, it's almost like an SNL sketch. It's ridiculous how every interview seems to go the same way, where, you know, they just talk about how grateful they are and how they knocked it out of the park, and then someone starts crying, and then the others like start consoling them, and then it just kind of keeps going cyclically that way.
And then of course there's the iconic interview where this one person's like, as a writer for a queer publication, which was already bizarre to start with, but then she was like, so many people are holding space for and then people like later were like, what does that even mean? And so then it was just bizarre. The what questions were asking people, the way these interviews went were just odd. They were just very, very odd. Now I'm sure they're all nice people and they're normal or whatever, but the interviews were just objectively odd. It got to the point to where I love Lady Gaga, but when she was doing her Star Is Born press tour and she kept saying you know, if 1 million people don't believe you, but one person in the room does, it's all that matters. She did that on all of her things. And it just kind of just became, you know, like at one point laughable, because it just kept being repeated. And it's like we're seeing the same thing here. We're like, oh my God, we get it. You're grateful to play these roles, yada, yada, yada. It's like you just like stop caring about the actors and their opinions, or even want to watch any of them regardless.
I think good job bringing up A Star Is Born, because I was kind of going to get into, like, one thing I think kind of contributes to these weird interviews. So when that movie came out, Lady Gaga kind of went temporarily insane. I don't know if you remember this. She was like in love with Bradley Cooper, despite the fact he was married, and just all like she got so into her role that she kind of went temporarily nuts for like a few months, and then she chilled out and, you know, became herself again. But I kind of think there's an element
there. I don't think there never was any actual confirmation that anything happened. There's lots of suspected stuff, but like, I don't think she cheated. She said that it was her
having her feelings. Like they did not have an affair. Let me be clear, allegedly or otherwise. There's no confirmation, but she was like saying how she was like in love with him and all this other. And again, it's like she was caught up in her feelings because she was playing someone who was in love with his character, and I'm sure she also really admired him as a director since she was working closely with him. They didn't have an affair. Don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying, and let me bring it back to this. I think the reason these interviews are so weird is that, one, this is a highly anticipated musical adaptation. Again, I don't think this would have done well even if it sucked, just like Gladiator 2. But there is a ton of pressure going into this, and probably more so because it's rare to see like good movie musicals nowadays. They come out, but like for something like this big, there's a lot riding on it, and so there's a lot of stress, which you're hoping that you live up to it, and I think that's kind of leading to them having a little bit of temporary insanity. One of the other kind of whatchamacallit, like one of the other stories with this, and it's not even marketing, I'm sure you heard about this. There was like a fan who made a poster for the movie that was closer, and Cynthia just like went crazy. She's, I feel like I'm being erased and all this, and it's like, dude, it's a fan edit. Calm down. And that's kind of where I think this is coming from. Is it's like there's a lot of stress going into you are going to be the movie version of this person. When Idina Menzel she got movie roles for being on the original Elphaba.
Yeah.
So it's just,
which I still contend was a mistake, but that's just me.
But I think that's kind of leading to the temporary insanity with this, and I think they might calm down. Maybe not. Maybe they're just like this. But I think a lot of that is just kind of riding on how anticipated this was, and that's another thing too. You've got the stories of the people kind of not being respectful in the screenings for Wicked. Thankfully, my screening was great.
Yeah, mine was fine too.
Yeah, no one, and I talked about this last year with the Eras tour. That is less annoying than if someone was trying to sing during this movie. Because I even said that when we were talking about that last year, is like, okay, at least it's like a concert film. I still don't think it's a good idea to like turn it into like a concert. I don't want to hear, I paid money to hear Taylor sing. I don't want to hear some like girl next to me start, belting. So like, I wasn't a fan of that either, but I feel like it's even less respectful here. And theater people are a whole other breed of animal where they almost want to make things about themselves. This is my opinion, but like, do you know what I mean? It's like, again, I'm sure you can sing all of the songs. I'm sure you know them by heart, but I am not here to see you.
Right. The only thing I consider
everyone has made this point.
The only thing I find acceptable is to mouth along, which I will do just out of habit.
Yeah,
but,
that's fine.
Years ago, I saw what was it? I think it was with the Wizard of Oz for the 70th or something anniversary, whatever it was. And I remember sitting in the theater, and there was this girl in front of me that was like, I think I can recite every line of this movie. She's talking to her friend.
Oh my God.
I'm just like, okay, I think I need to move and find somewhere else to sit because you will drive me nuts.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of a perfect example.
I went and saw Hamilton live when it came around, and people are sitting in the audience who are like, diehard fans, and they're singing, and I'm just like, bitch, stop. This is not your moment. I paid money to see a live performance. It's not a concert. This is like going to a movie, but with live people. I don't want to hear your rendition of, of anything from Hamilton. I can't think of a song title right now, but anything from Hamilton.
I got you. Yeah. No, it's as I said, I know I'm painting with broad strokes here. I know not all theater kids are like this or theater adults, but there's like a type of person, and I know people listening know the kind of person I'm talking about, where it's like it's not about the artistry, it's about the attention.
Yeah.
And that too, I can understand if this is your favorite musical and you are just feeling a lot of emotions finally seeing a movie version of it.
Yeah.
But
wait
again,
for the sing-along screenings. They always do that with big musicals. They do sing-along screenings.
Yeah.
Wait for that.
Or and that too, you can play it at home when it comes out.
Yeah, I want you to stop right now and watch this short I just sent you, because I think this is what you and I were both scared of happening in the theater. Go ahead and watch that short that I just sent you.
Yeah, okay, so the short that T sent me, I'm sure it's going to be edited for time. So we have a woman in green face paint sitting on the shoulders of a man performing the song and completely blocking the screen so that nobody can even see what's going on, and just performing the Defying Gravity. Yeah, that is exactly what I'm talking about. And again, thankfully, it sounds like you also had a wonderful, theater going experience. I did as well. I could tell a lot of people were very excited for this. I definitely was sitting next to a theater nerd, but no one did any of this. And kudos to all of the people. Again, like I don't mind certain types of outbursts. I don't mind applauding. That's something that happened during my screening. Everyone clapped at the end. Cool.
Yeah.
And I talk about horror movies and how sometimes it's kind of adds to the experience seeing it in person if someone screams when they're scared or something. You know, that's fine. Sometimes you can't control certain kinds of outbursts. But you made a perfect point about like mouthing along. You don't have to sing. Like if someone was like crying next to me, I wouldn't get mad at them because they're
having an emotional reaction to what's happening. That's what
exactly.
You're supposed to
And
do.
I think I did hear someone crying in my theater during one point. So whatever, that didn't ruin the movie for me, but. Yeah, people need to chill. I was just talking about how we're still kind of coming out of the pandemic, and there's certain behaviors people have nowadays that I think are kind of still from that time when we were socially isolated and they forgot how to be a person.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's kind of where that's coming from.
Well, my mom always says
this,
people go to movie theaters and act like it's their house.
Yeah. But wrapping this up, I had two questions for you regarding the whole Glicked thing. Question number one, do you think Glicked would actually make a good double feature?
Let's see. I don't really know the plot of the first one. But
a gladiator?
So from what I see of the trailers, though, I think it could be. I mean, they're both inherent, battles of good versus evil, I think, from what I've seen in the trailer. And I do think seeing two different, ways of approaching that kind of very broad genre can be quite interesting. And, I would say, much like with Barbie and Oppenheimer, I would see Wicked second because I feel like the first one will be a downer. That's just me.
Right? Okay. It's funny. I like how diplomatic you're being. I'm actually going to argue the opposite, and I've got like a little reason for it. So, because I have seen both of these movies, I will be talking about them in our next episode and reviewing them. But so let's go back to Barbenheimer. Part of the reason that worked so well, and it sounded like it worked well with people who went to the double feature, partly what it was just how funny it was, how polar opposite they were. One was like very serious and intense, and then the other one was very bubbly and fun. Here's the key thing with Glicked. I do think that like thematically it works as a double feature the same way as Barbenheimer, but I think the key difference is this: length. Oppenheimer was 3 hours long. Barbie was like a tight 90 minutes. Might have been like an hour and 40 minutes. Good. Both Wicked and Gladiator 2 are 2.5 hours long.
Yeah.
Regardless, even if you like both of these movies, that is a slog. I think part of the reason Barbenheimer worked as a double feature was that one was also, on top of being very fun and bubbly, it was very brief. And then the one that was very serious was a bit longer. And I don't know what order that they played in. I guess it kind of depends on your
preference.
opinion. Exactly. So that is I have a legitimate reason for saying I don't think Glicked would be a very good double feature, and it's that they are both absurdly long movies. Well, not absurdly long. They're not like 3.5 hours. But just the fact that they're both long movies, I think would kind of ruin it for a lot of people. You'd get tired. You might fall asleep. So that's just my opinion. Second question.
Okay.
Do you think Glicked was actually a thing?
I do not think it was a thing. I think they tried to pretend it was a thing. I think they wanted to make it a thing. I don't think it happened. And I think they tried to pretend afterwards like it was a thing. Like they were talking about, the Glicked. I'm like, Glicked didn't happen. And I think one of the main problems with it is I do think the types of audiences that were attracted to the movies were not the same. And I've said this multiple times. People thought, I remember reading articles about this after the first one came out. After Oppenheimer was successful, people were like, they're hungry for biofilms. No, they're not. They wanted to see the next Christopher Nolan film because he has lots of clout with his generation and they respect his filmmaking, his views on things, and they were excited to see what he wanted to see. He's made like at least 2 films I can think of that have become like cultural touchstones for a generation. One being the Batman series, and the other one is Inception. Those ones get talked about all the time. And so I think that was really going to kind of do that 20s to 40s demographic that was really going to pick up if not every. I think it's kind of both sexes kind of agree on Christopher Nolan. I think I could be wrong, but I think they do. So they were already going to see it, and then Barbie. It got everyone excited, everyone nostalgic again in that same demographic. And when the fact they were coming out on the same day, it was kind of just like, I was going to see both. Let's make it an event. It wasn't kind of like a forced thing. And
also the theaters got it. Like there was no Glicked double features. Like no one did that this time. And there wasn't the other thing is that Barbenheimer was organic. It came from people making memes about it, and then the studios thought, well, wait a second, what if we did a thing about this? Like, what if we actually? When I say studios, I mean more like movie theater companies. But then they got in on it, and it ended up actually working both in the movie's favor and in the theaters because they were able to maximize sales by showing them separately as well as having the double feature option if you wanted. So It was organic. This one, I don't even know who was pushing for it. I don't know if it was.
I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything online about it. I mean, when I say online, I mean on TikTok, Instagram,
exactly.
Facebook. The only time I saw it come up was when there was an actual Variety or Entertainment Weekly or somebody they were writing about the weekend or something. Yeah. The only time I saw it mentioned, and then they kind of talk about it in passing. It was not a thing, and they both did well, but I think they also both attracted different audiences.
Yes, and
I don't think there was much crossover between. There may have been some crossover, but I don't think the people who were excited for Gladiator were necessarily excited for Wicked, and people who were excited for Wicked weren't really into Gladiator.
Exactly. And I don't think anybody made. Obviously, there were no memes about it. It wasn't made into a funny joke the way Barbenheimer was in the early days.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know it was a thing. So you texted me "Have you heard about Glicked?" And I was like, "What's Glicked?"
Yeah.
And then right after you asked me that, I was, like you said, I was seeing it in movie publications like Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. So no one was talking about Glicked except movie reporters.
Right.
And then I was hearing people I
think they were trying really hard to make it a thing, and it just didn't take off.
It's like Fetch. It's never going to happen.
Yeah. I feel like Barbenheimer was a lightning in a bottle situation.
Yes, I still say what I think what I said last year. I would like to see more goofy pairings of movies made into double features. if they want to try and make another Barbenheimer happen, please do. Hell, I was just talking about how there's like 12 movies coming out on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
Nosferatu and an Unknown, that like Bob Dylan movie, or something else. I mean, there's plenty of options. I'm very okay with them trying to make something happen. But yeah, I don't think anything is going to be as successful as Barbenheimer because, like I said, it happened organically and it kind of started as a joke because it's like these two polar opposite movies just happen to be coming out on the same day.
It was kind of like let's all storm Area 51. They can't stop all of us.
Exactly. That is a perfect example because it was so funny. People signed up for it, and then when enough people signed up for it, they were like, hey, wait a second, we might actually be able to do a thing with this. Maybe obviously not really storm Area 51, but maybe we could all like gather at the gate or, create a music festival. Like that was like a whole thing, but that's exactly a perfect parallel because it started out as something the people were mobilizing for.
Yeah.
So no, Glicked is not a thing. And as I said, in my opinion, I don't think it would have been a good double feature, just because they're both very... And I think you also hit the nail on the head. The fact that Gladiator was, they were marketing it to people watching football games.
Yeah.
I think that kind of says what you need to know about, it's average dudes going to the movies. Probably not people even really interested in the artistry. Like I said, the first Gladiator is actually... like it's one of those I think is an appropriate answer if someone is asked like what's the greatest film of all time. If someone said Gladiator, I think that's a totally fair answer the same way someone might say Citizen Kane.
Yeah,
exactly. That being said, I don't think that the people who understand or appreciate the artistry of Gladiator are the ones that they were marketing Gladiator to. I think it was just hey man, swords and sharks and rhino with armor on. Come to see Gladiator 2.
Yeah, no.
But now that Glicked has passed, why don't we get on to the feature presentation? What are you drinking?
So I am drinking what's referred to as an Aqua Velva.
Haha! Knew it.
So, fun fact, this is one of the things I'm going to go ahead and turn to my handy dandy phone for. It's interesting about the Aqua Velva. Now, Aqua Velva is an aftershave. It's also blue, I think. Or the bottle was blue or something. But the drink in the movie he drinks is called the Aqua Velva, and it's made of like gin, rum, and... what's the other one I'm thinking of? Gin, rum, and blue Curacao. I don't know.
Curacao. I know what you mean. It's
But what's interesting is the history of this drink is actually tied almost intrinsically to this movie. And I didn't know if you do that because I thought this was a drink outside of the movie. And there's actually some debate as to whether or not it existed before the movie.
Okay, I'm gonna let you definitely need to get into that. I'm gonna say so. It's funny. We're talking about Zodiac, obviously. If you didn't read the title of this episode, anyone who's seen the movie, which we recommend you do before listening to this show, the Aqua Velva is like prominently featured in the movie. Which is awesome. I actually forgot that it was, and when it came up, I was like, oh, I love it when there's actually like a recognizable cocktail you can associate with the film. That being said, I knew you were probably going to make one because why wouldn't you? It's literally like a big part of the movie. So I did another blue drink. And this one I don't think I have ever featured on the show, but... it's one that my college friends invented back in my university days. So it's called a Blue Dream, and I botched it. My friend said I didn't botch it. It's like, oh, your version is just going to be like a spin-off. So I'm going to say what the actual recipe is, and then I'll tell you what's in mine. So for a Blue Dream, you need 2 parts vodka, 4 parts Mountain Berry Powerade, specifically Powerade, not Gatorade. Which I did get right. And then you finish it off with half a part of Rose's sweet lime juice. And so that is a Blue Dream. So I have got the 2 parts vodka, the 4 parts Mountain Berry Powerade, but I don't think I could find Rose's sweet lime juice specifically. So I just have, I bought a lime and squeezed fresh lime juice into it. So that's how mine is different, but that's what I'm drinking.
Did you
so
check,
now get into the...
Wait, first off, did you check Target for your sweet lime juice?
I did. I could have when I was doing one of my Target runs, but at that point I wasn't looking at the ingredients.
Because I swear they sell like Rose's grenadine.
There you go. They might have it.
Okay. So there you go. Anyone who anyone who wants to stock and recreate whiskey's life, that's what you do. This is how you get anyway. Okay,
there you go.
So I was looking at this recipe because I could have sworn I've heard of this cocktail before. Maybe it's from other times I'd seen it, but I thought I'd heard of it outside of it. And there's actually some it's contested where it actually comes from. So in an article on a website called punchdrink.com was published in 2022 by Aaron Goldfarb. They talk about the history of this drink, which, by the way, I love that line that Robert Downey Jr. says, okay, this can no longer be ignored. He's talking about this giant drink that he has. Which one of the things I do like about that scene is the fact that they acknowledge for the first time that fruity drinks are usually stronger than the manly drinks that men get. But yeah, so he talks about, it's an Aqua Velva. So according to this article, the first draft of James Vanderbilt's shooting script did not list the drink. It just said huge blue umbrella drink. And then later in other versions it was labeled as blue girly drink. It doesn't exist in the book it's adapted from. And then several online accounts include what does it say here? Some online accounts, like they talk about this one, Cocktails of the Movies, an Illustrated Guide to Cinematic Mythology. They do list Aqua Velva as a legitimate cocktail, not as something you invented for the movie. But then he says that he went and talked to, like, what are those people called, like, drink historians or whatever, and they, like, have never even heard of it or didn't know of it until the movie. And so they said even the Wikipedia page wasn't for the drink didn't exist until 3 months after the movie premiered. So this drink may have been entirely invented for the movie.
That's really cool.
But Aqua Velva, they did name it after the aftershave, which in its bottle is a blue. It looks like it's almost like a Listerine blue color. But I guess nobody wants to drink a cocktail called Listerine.
No.
But yeah, so it's this gin. Hold on, I want to read you this again because
I saw because I almost considered making one. Part of the reason I went with the Blue Dream was because I knew you were going to make an Aqua Velva most likely, and then the other reason is it's one of those cocktails with a bunch of random, like 5 ingredients as opposed to 3. So I was like, and it was a double. It was gin and vodka, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's gin, vodka, and blue curacao, and usually Sprite. I didn't add Sprite to mine because I didn't buy any. But this is interesting. He does say that I guess this guy who wrote this article he reached out to the actual Robert Graysmith, and he did not respond to their queries on this topic. But yeah, so did this exist before? Possibly, but there's no actual evidence of it existing before this movie. But what's great is that it seems totally realistic for the time, because I think the 1960s is when we kind of saw the rise of like the tiki bar sort of thing, and people go out to tiki bars and they would get these kind of drinks. So it seems realistic, but it seems that there's a large possibility that it was an invention of the film. So that's fun. But on that note, cheers. Let's all have a sip. Yes. Like, I haven't been sipping it this whole time, but it is what it is. But
right,
in case I forgot, Zodiac 2007 And I remember this because I just heard about the Zodiac killer 3 months before on summer vacation when my mom used to watch Lifetime in the morning, and they used to show like, because she'd watch like The Nanny and The Golden Girls in the morning, and then at some point, because Lifetime used to own Unsolved Mysteries, Unsolved Mysteries would come on. But this is how I first discovered Unsolved Mysteries, and then they ran a segment on the Zodiac killer, and I was terrified for like months, even though they were talking about something that happened like, at that point like 30 years ago.
But he was never caught. He was
never caught, but I remember thinking it was hilarious that I first heard about him at that point, and then there's suddenly a movie was coming out about him like a few months later, or I at least saw ads for it a few months later. Starring in this movie, there's lots of people in this movie. I'm just sticking with the 3 leads. Jake Gyllenhaal as Robert Graysmith, Mark Ruffalo as Dave Toschi, and Robert Downey Jr. as Paul Avery. This is directed by David Fincher, who we know from works such as Vogue, Express Yourself, the Suit and Tie music video, and Fight Club.
Yes. And Gone Girl, and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and Seven, and many others.
I was trying to list the most relevant titles, Whiskey. But
you're not wrong, but I think that T is a bit of a closeted Fincher fanboy, because I think you like his stuff more than you realize. Because he also did, I think maybe it's Criminal Minds, maybe it's
you're thinking of Mindhunter. You're thinking of Mindhunter, and I watched the first episode, couldn't get into it.
Okay.
I also liked Seven until the end. I hated the end of Seven, and the ending is what's famous about that movie. So I was super disappointed by that ending.
There's a couple of things famous about it. I mean, Seven, you could have this. It's not November anymore, but the idea was that this was Noir November. But Seven could have been something that was, on this, which is fair enough. There's a couple of things that are famous about Seven, though. There's, for instance, how the murders are never shown. You see the aftermath of them, but you never actually see anyone being murdered.
Right.
And there's some really harrowing performances just from some of the random character actors in that movie. But he does a lot of crime movies.
Yeah, he does a lot of crime movies. Like you mentioned Gone Girl, you mentioned Seven.
And you liked Fight Club, and you haven't seen Gone Girl. I think you would really like Gone Girl.
If only because it's a movie where Neil Patrick Harris gets shut up for once.
Ooh, shots fired.
If I have to see him host one more award show, I swear. And then the screenplay was by James Vanderbilt. He also wrote The Amazing Spider-Man, which starred Andrew Garfield.
Want to know a real fun fact? I have met the man. I didn't realize he wrote this.
When did you meet him?
He was one of the executives at a company I interned at.
That's so embarrassing for you, Whiskey. Well, to be fair,
so?
To be fair, I don't think you'd seen it yet. I don't think you'd seen it yet either. Because you and I went and saw it at the Secret Movie Club.
Oh yeah, I hadn't seen that. Well, he also never came into the office. He came in every once in a while, but he was kind of the screenwriter there.
Yeah.
So he was usually at home. Every once in a while when they were doing pitches and stuff like that, he'd come in. Really nice guy. Liked him a lot. Very friendly. Was super personable. Nothing but good things to say about him. But that's cool. I didn't know he wrote this. I knew. Obviously, working there and stuff, I knew about, a bunch of the other stuff he had written, like the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I think he wrote White House Down.
Yes, he did.
That was something... Pretty much, a bunch of stuff that he wrote was, stuff that they were...
shopping around?
They weren't producing. It was in... what was it? Man, my drink's already frying my brain. Development. There was a development company. So, but anyway, that's cool. Fun fact: Whiskey has had dinner with James Vanderbilt at one point when we were all doing the.
Is he related to the Vanderbilts, like of like
Yes,
the Gene,
yes,
like the Gene Company people?
Yes.
Oh wow.
So like, you know, and you could say that about him. He definitely like comes from money and stuff like that. But he's a super down to earth guy. I enjoyed it. Again, pretty much for the farewell dinner was the only time I really spent any time with him. But he was very, very nice. I liked him a lot.
So you wouldn't have classified him with like the other Nepo babies?
No. You know, I'm sure a lot of things have come to him because of his family, but no, like, well, and that too. You know, he is actually writing things, you know.
Right. He has to actually do the work. So
exactly. You know, like you could say, oh, he's rich or whatever, like, but whatever. I mean, he is literally writing the movies. So, and he's made some good ones. This is a good movie. Again, I did not know he wrote this somehow. So I really, this is probably one of the better things he's written.
Well, you know what's interesting is you're usually the one that picks up on stuff in credits, and I rarely ever get to scoop you on something. So I was excited to scoop you on this a little bit, and you know, because and just from this script alone, I'm gonna go ahead and, to quote Casey Ayanto, I'm gonna put him on the snap Kirby tier of Nepo babies. You know, these are the ones that we are rooting for, whose fame has surpassed, or their abilities has surpassed that you almost forget they're a Nepo baby. But
right,
I'm just trying to so and so he went ahead and he adapted this from Zodiac by Robert Graysmith and Zodiac Unmasked, also by Robert Graysmith. Cinematography was by Harris Savetis, who also did Milk. Unfortunately, he has passed away. He passed away at the age of 55 of brain cancer. Poor guy. Music was by David Shire, who also did the music for like Norma Ray and Short Circuit. The budget of this film was 65 to 85 million, and its box office was 84 million. So not a huge hit. I mean, not like anything to sneeze at, but like when they compare it by how much it costs to make, not a big hit. The reception on Rotten Tomatoes has 90%.
That's good.
It was nominated it was nominated for lots of awards at various film festivals, including for the Palme d'Or. I believe that's at the Venice Film Festival, if I remember correctly. Right? Or is that no, it's Cannes. Excuse me, it's Cannes.
Oh, yeah.
Cannes, the Cannes Film Festival.
Of course, it's French.
It's French. And it won. The only one it won, though, was Best Director at the Dublin Film Critics Circle Awards. Was for David Fincher for Best Director. No Academy nominations, no BAFTA nominations, which I do think is a travesty. That's just me. Reviews for this movie are very, very positive. I will say, though, there are some reviews that are wild, and I'm going to call one out in particular. I was just like, who wrote this and thought this sounded good? So, you know, one of the big, like, film snobby publications over in the UK is called Sight and Sound.
Oh, yeah.
So, their person... And he meant this in a good thing, but I was just like, I did not understand this. But it was just such a bizarre, like, what is it called? It was just such a bizarre compliment that I wish I had to call this out. So Graham Fuller wrote in Sight and Sound, the tone is pleasingly flat and mundane. And he's saying that's a good thing because it evokes the demoralizing grind of police work in a pre-feminist, pre-technological era. So, but I was just like,
I kind of get what he means. This is an interesting movie. No, it sounds. There's a couple of things. One, I remember when this movie came out as well. This was like right around the time I started taking film seriously. I remember reading a review in the local paper for this movie because it looked cool. Mm-hmm. And I didn't end up seeing it, but I remember it just kind of came and went. Like it was up for a bunch of Academy Awards, I remember as well.
No, it wasn't.
And Oh, it wasn't. Oh, yeah, you know what? I think, yeah, because that was another weird thing. My point is, like, the review I read gave it, like, an average. You know, they didn't think it was bad, but they were like, it's okay. And it didn't win. It didn't get nominated for any awards. So it was like a movie, and that might have even been why I didn't end up seeing it, because it's like, oh, it's really long. Oh, it didn't end up winning anything. It didn't, you know. So it's one of those that came and went. I didn't end up seeing it. But it's come back. It's one of those movies that didn't get respected in its time, but I'd say a lot of people say it's like one of Fincher's best films, and it's one that you see a lot in film school. Like, even before I saw it with you, I was like seeing scenes in classes and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of one of those that has had a resurgence in popularity and is probably more fondly looked at than it was at the time it came out, which is cool. As far as that,
I think one of the things that's kind of really helped in its resurgence is, especially in the true crime genre, as far as films go, it's really kind of a standalone in the fact that it doesn't focus a lot on the crimes themselves. It's really, really, and much like The Exorcist, and that's why I like The Exorcist too for this reason, it's really more about, I mean, we see some of the crimes, but nothing is like the crimes all happen within like the first third of the movie, and this is a long movie, and most of it's about the investigation, what they're doing, what they're seeing, what they're getting, and for a film to not sit there and try to sensationalize, or, you know, kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Exploit the crimes and, you know, how disturbing they were, I do think is something that kind of makes this a standalone in the true crime, especially with as true crime has had, you know, kind of a resurgence in mainstream popularity, because for the longest time it was kind of like, yeah, it existed as a genre, but we don't really talk about that genre of stuff.
Well, like, it's become super popular. Yeah. Like, it's always existed. It's the TikTokification of true crime has happened. You know what I mean? Like, there's a whole community. There's fandoms. There's people thirsting over serial killers, which has also always been a thing. You know, they would always get fan letters and things like that when they were in prison. But yeah, it's more popular now than it has ever been. And not even like TikTokification, but even like a decade ago, you know, you were telling me about some show you were watching recently, and I made a reference to Investigation Discovery. Yeah. There's a whole network for true crime. If that is your favorite thing ever, there's a whole channel. There's a streaming platform, I'm pretty sure, that's just Investigation Discovery. So, like, just like any content, I mean, you know, I'm always talking about horror. Shudder is just a streaming platform for horror movies. So it's like that, where it's like, if you like true crime, you can subsist on a diet completely just of true crime. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think that might be part of the reason it's had a resurgence in popularity.
And it's not Ryan Murphying it up, you know.
No. Well, and it's funny, this goes back to what I was just saying about Seven, and maybe it would be worth a rewatch. You won't like the ending any better, but it's something to think about, is you never see any of the murders happening in that movie. And yeah, in Seven. Even the big ending, like, you know what happened to that character, but you didn't see it happen. Yeah. You know? And so it's kind of similar in that sense. And yeah, like what T is referring to, like I was talking about people thirsting after serial killers, and Ryan Murphy's stuff, something T and I kind of agree with each other about, is like it focuses on the wrong things, I think, a little bit. Kind of sensationalizes the killer and turns them into a bit of the focus, I guess. But this is where, like, I agree that Sight and Sound article is really hilariously badly worded. Yeah. But I do agree with what they're trying to say, because there is a mundanity. Like, there's a procedural aspect to this film and that's kind of something I was going to get into, right? Is like, this is Neo Noir November in December, but like, is this Neo Noir? Because it has moments of being Neo Noir, right? Like, I think of the basement scene towards the end of the film, or like when that character is like talking to the cop kind of secretly in like dark places and stuff. But there's at least half of this movie just takes place in like fluorescently lit like offices of the San Francisco Chronicle, and you know, and that's what the movie is about. It's not about the murders. It's about the you know, journalists who covered the murders and were able to kind of piece together who might be the killer and how that interfered with the police investigation. And that's also, I think, maybe why people didn't find it very interesting when it came out. And that's the thing, too. I never saw this until I saw it with you about 5 years ago. But I feel like my teenage self probably would have been a little disappointed based on the marketing I saw for this movie in 2007, because a lot of it was like those really moody shots you see in the movie.
Yeah.
And I remember there was one that's like on the poster of like the Golden Gate Bridge. And I just remember thinking those were like the images that stood out in my head. And so I do think that if I had seen it as like a 15-year-old or whatever, however old I was when this came out, I think I probably wouldn't have hated the movie, but I would have been very like disappointed that a lot of it was just kind of, you know, about the journalists and about them decoding stuff.
Well, there's kind of, I mean, you probably, if you ever just to watch it, I do think there's a movie that came out last year that kind of is very, very similar in vein to this. People who are fans of this will probably call the other one a Pale Imitation. I still think it's good. The Boston Strangler starring Keira Knightley. Very similar.
Oh yeah. You were talking about this in one of our finales. I forgot if I think it was 2 years ago, right?
I thought it was last year.
Might have been last year.
But so you know, but like one of the things I really do like about this is it's all about the piecing together, and like I said, much like the way The Exorcist works. Like I told you, I went and saw The Exorcist at like a midnight showing in Coolidge Corner in Boston, and some guy fell asleep in the middle of the movie, and I'm like, how could you fall asleep? This is like so fascinating. But yeah, I get that. And you say that the complaints that did come through from people, if they talked about it, it was too long. Critics, like the critics who didn't like it, they talked about like even the ones that like it did say it was a bit long. And this is also the shortened version of the film that we are seeing. And the other thing that I will say that I kind of feel, I don't think anyone else does, I kind of feel like the movie's a little disjointed. Like, to me, it's made up of three very specific, like almost like stories. They all interconnect, but it's like the first third, I think it's three. The first third is obviously as stuff's happening. The second third is investigation, and we focus mostly on Toshi and his character, and then the last part we refocus on Robert Graysmith. The first part is like Avery, Toshi, Graysmith, and that's why I chose those three to highlight as the actors, because there's a ton of people in this movie. But I do think, but the way they connect is a little disjointed, because the fact that you even forget people are characters in the movie for a period of time. Which, especially Robert Graysmith, during the second section of the movie, he kind of fades into the background and you don't really hear from him for a while, and then it's like he shows up again.
Yeah, and that was something, again, this is kind of fun reminiscing about how I remembered this movie being marketed when I was a teenager, because I was like under the impression before I saw it for the first time that like Graysmith was the main character. Like I saw him all over the marketing, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I like to solve puzzles and all this other stuff, and they showed like little bits of him investigating later in the movie. So I think I was a little surprised when I saw this for the first time, the fact that it kind of has different sections, like, because I completely agree with what you're saying, because there's also Avery and Graysmith are kind of like friends at the beginning, sort of. Like, he's hovering around Avery's desk, and that's like a whole section, because then Avery sort of has he leaves, he becomes an alcoholic, and, you know, he exits the movie, except for like a scene way later.
Yeah.
And that feels almost like the first third of the movie. And then, yeah, as you said, Toshi becomes sort of the focus and investigating, and they're going in on the, you know, the famous leads that they had, the people of interest that people believe to be the Zodiac killer. And then, yeah, it kind of ends with Graysmith being the protagonist for the final third, where he's sort of taking the investigation too far and into his own hands, and he's going places that are dangerous, that he, you know... I mentioned the basement scene. That still is probably one of the best scenes in the movie. Partly also just because what a stupid thing to be doing. Like,
right.
And for him to be so misinformed to not know who actually drew the posters and things like that. It's so, like, oh my God. But I guess I agree. I think it's a little disjointed. It's one of those movies that I think could be tightened up a bit. I forgot. I just watched the theatrical version. Was I supposed to watch like an edited version, or
no? The theatrical version is the edited version.
Okay.
There's the extended version, and then I'll talk briefly a bit about his original version of the film, which
definitely interested in that. Good. Yes, I saw the vanilla theatrical version of the film, and I will. The ending is weird, so. I will defend the guy who fell asleep during The Exorcist. The first time T and I saw this was at Secret Movie Club. They did a midnight screening. Shout out to the Secret Movie Club over in Los Angeles.
We love you.
Love you guys. So, because it was a midnight screening, and because it's nearly, you know, it's a 2.5 hour movie, I was kind of falling asleep when I first saw this with you. Not because it was bad, but because it was so late, and you know, I'd been awake all day, and then I go to see a movie at midnight. So it feels its length a little bit. It's one of those I feel like could be tightened up a little more. I'm curious to hear once you get into the other cuts. The one thing I do sort of like, the ending's really weird, but I like that it ties into the opening scene, because that's another thing I had seen in a film class and was surprised by before I'd seen this for the first time. But I know that the opening scene is of one of the first murders. Was it the first? I mean, I guess it depends on whether you believe he was murdering people in Los Angeles before he went up north. You know, that's the whole thing. But so the opening scene is a couple being gunned down. And the man survives, and that's like an ongoing thing with the Zodiac killer, is he never finishes off the men for some reason. Like, a lot of them end up surviving. But I like how they're interviewing, and you kind of forget about that character completely by the end of the movie, and it's like, you know, the final line is like, that's the guy who shot me.
Yeah.
And it took me a second to realize, like as the credits were rolling, I was like, oh wait, that's the guy. But it's I like the beginning and the ending kind of. I think that final line really wraps things up, kind of, at least for where the story is at that point. The other troubling thing not troubling, that's probably a bad word, but another interesting thing with this movie is that, you know, now, I think it was last year, maybe it was even this year, people are pretty sure they know exactly who the Zodiac killer is. Mm-hmm. But at the point this movie came out, I mean, he'd still never been caught. Obviously, people had their theories. A lot of people really believed it was one person or the other. But it's kind of one of those, the story's not even really over yet, so where do we end this, really?
Yeah, it's like you said, it's like, so I do think, so this is something that I do know that the screenwriter Vanderbilt did struggle with, because, you know, he was the one that kind of championed sort of getting this put into a script form, even before David Fincher had become involved in the project. And he always had moralistic qualms with he didn't really want to he didn't want to write a movie that could potentially incriminate somebody who may be innocent, because there's a lot of like hearsay and rumors and stuff that go on that people now accept as fact. So one of the things though that he and Fincher did do is they literally went back and interviewed any witnesses they could, went back and read through the old police reports, and this all factored into writing the script, which I thought that was, they said they took a couple months to do that. So I thought that was pretty incredible. They made the effort to go back in time and really, like I said, track down who they could and make them and get as much information as they can. They even had, and I wrote down their names here, and I thought I wrote it down. Now I'm upset. The two surviving victims that are featured in the film are also on this. They're also were part of the film. They were technical advisors for the film as well. And I'm upset. Oh, here we go. I wrote it down in plain print so that I could tell you who they are and not have to guess. One of them is Mike Mageau and Brian Hartnell. They were they served as technical advisors for the film. So not technical advisors. They were what's the word I'm looking for? I am like, see, this Aquavelva is getting to me too.
Right? It's the danger, man. It's last year that Jack in Black that I had obliterated me.
Right.
It's those double booze cocktails. If there's ever a cocktail with two types of alcohol, it's gonna wreck you.
They were brought on as consultants to the film. So, you know, again, the fact that they're bringing the victims on to be consultants is a whole new level of respect that's brought to this film, because this is about the crimes and the investigation following, not, you know, like, let's scare everybody with being as disturbing as possible, you know?
Right? And I think that is kind of, I forgive it for being disjointed, because again, this is kind of an interesting movie in that it's not about the murderer. It's not entirely, like, it's not just about the journalists. It's not just about the police. Like, I'm not surprised that Vanderbilt used two different books to put this together. Like, it feels like it's very...
They were written by the same person, so...
You know what I mean, though.
Yeah.
Like, it's... and it's also, they were written by, you know, Jake Gyllenhaal's character.
Yeah.
So... But the fact that there's such an attention to detail does not surprise me, because it feels like it's trying to get everything. And I also think that's why it didn't resonate with audiences. It's not just the fact that cinematography isn't as, like, cool looking as they wanted. It's not just because of the mundanity of everything happening. I think it's also, like, especially for, like, a mainstream audience, you need, like, a protagonist to latch on to. And the fact this is almost like kind of a documentary in a narrative, cinematic, like, theatrical form.
Yeah.
I'm even having trouble explaining it, but it's almost like, what if, like, a documentary were just, like, acted out instead of, like, you know what I mean? It's because it's coming from all directions. It's from various perspectives. And that too, like, that's the other kind of interesting thing, is, like, certain murders from the case you do see. It doesn't glorify them. It doesn't make them look really cool or super, like, you know, there's the shooting at the beginning. There's the stabbing at the park. And there's almost a mundanity to those as well.
They really, they technically, they show 4 crimes, but the 3 that are considered violent, with the exception of the taxi one, the one at the beginning and the one at the lake, the 2 survivors served as consultants on it. So you do know it was being displayed as closely as to what they remembered. And so I thought, you know, that was really important that be noted too. I mean, the taxi driver one was just such an iconic one. And I think the reason why that was in is I think they were able to go back and actually talk to the people who witnessed it from the window across the street. What's interesting though about that sequence is the neighborhood did not want that recreated in their neighborhood. So that entire street corner was built on a soundstage, and background and stuff was CGI'd in. They said, they originally said, oh, the corners changed too much over the years. And then, but they also said that the neighborhood didn't want the murder recreated, on their streets. So, which I'm guessing was the real reason why. But I thought that it was pretty impressive that that whole intersection was recreated on a soundstage. And it doesn't look like it. That looks like it's out in the open, because I don't know if you can tell when people film stuff for the most part on Universal's backlot or Paramount's backlot, because I don't know if you know what I mean. It has a backlot look to it. It looks so.
Oh, I absolutely know what you mean.
It's overwhelmingly generic. It looks real, but there's something. It's something uncanny about it. But this looked.
There's something.
Real.
So something that bothered me about Eyes Wide Shut is that you could clearly tell that it was not really New York.
That was the only thing that bothered you about Eyes Wide Shut.
Well, you know what I mean. It was a funny thing about Stanley Kubrick in his later life. He moved to London and he just wanted to shoot everything in London. It's the same thing, you notice it in Full Metal Jacket as well, where it's you are clearly, this is not Vietnam. It does not look like,
this is clearly
Asia.
The
it does
English
not
countryside.
Yeah, literally, they just put palm trees up, and it's here we are in Vietnam, and it was the same thing. I think I saw Eyes Wide Shut before I saw it, but it's the same deal where it's you can clearly tell you're not really there.
Right.
And I did not know that about the recreation, and I completely agree. That's actually really cool. I didn't know that they did that. But I do remember, again, going back to my teenage years, I remember seeing little featurettes and things where they showed some of the CGI in the movie that you wouldn't think would be CGI, like that shot of the Golden Gate Bridge I was talking about, I think is actually digitally put in. I might be wrong about that, but I just remember seeing a bunch of different
I think they said
featurettes about that.
If I remember correctly, I think when I was reading, they said that I think some opening and closing shots of San Francisco were done by a matte company.
Okay. Okay.
I could be wrong, but I remember that being a thing. But yeah, so the work on this and the fact that it's CGI from 2007, that's aged incredibly well. I thought it was pretty good. They said they filmed 5 weeks in San Francisco and the rest of it was done in LA. I remember when you and I watched the film in theater, that was the first time I watched it since living in LA, and I was like, that's by my house, when they have that whole conversation.
Yup, and I remember you pointed it out to me because that was very close to where I lived.
Yeah.
And that was crazy. It was, well, and that too. The funny thing to me, because he's not supposed to be in LA at that point, is he? I know part of the investigation takes place in LA, but he's talking to...
A very short segment takes place in Riverside, but everything else is supposed to be in San Francisco and the Bay
And I remember that. There you go. Because that was the other thing I was thinking when we were watching it, because you had pointed out that that's where that was. And I was like, well, wait a second. I know they go to L.A., and it's not even him. It's Avery, right? That goes to L.A.
Yeah, Robert. Not Robert, but Paul Avery, yeah.
Yeah, Paul Avery. And I was like, well, wait a second. This is supposed to be San Francisco. Why is this, place in K-Town the location? So, whatever. But so, yeah, you were talking about all the different cuts. What are the difference? Obviously they're all longer than theatrical, but do you have an opinion on which one's the best one? Go into that. I'm a little curious.
So I've seen the two that are available, which is the director's cut and the theatrical cut. Personally, I like the theatrical cut better. The director's cut adds about 5 minutes to the film. So the film is already at 2 hours and 37 minutes. The director's cut adds 5 minutes. But the one that he wanted to turn in ran 3 hours and 8 minutes. And I guess Paramount really wanted to release it, I guess, during award season. But they were like, the film's too long. They wanted David to make cuts to it, and I guess he had final, according to Wikipedia, he had final cut, and at one point refused to make any further cuts. So they eventually got it down. I don't know if that was at the 3 hour and 8 version or another one, but eventually they whittled it down. They got it 2 hours 37 minutes. And the reason why I will say that I like it better than the director's cut is one major scene. And and by scene, I'm putting scene in quotes. Because of the cut footage, we're only aware of like 5 minutes of sequences, but the most obvious of them is, instead of showing, I believe it's between the second and third segment, like from the Toshi to the Robert Graysmith section. I think that's where it's at. I think. When the way that we watch a movie, it'll just say 4 years later, or 5 years. It's 4 or 5 years later. Well, originally he had this 2-minute montage over a black screen of top hits from the years playing. Nothing's happening, so the screen is black, but that was how he was going to show the passage of time. And
That's stupid.
I get it. Stupid. It's creative. It's different. Film is a visual media. You need to show it to me. I was going to say,
yep, because a 2-minute montage is a neat idea, but yeah, like not just sound. Like, come on, let's see let's see how the fashion has changed. Let's see, maybe some other big news stories happening.
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, the montage, because I've seen the director's cut, and I actually thought there was something wrong with my copy of the movie. It was weird.
Yeah.
It said, according to this, a 2-minute blackout montage of hit songs signaling the passage of time from Joni Mitchell to Donna Summer. It was later replaced with a title card that reads 4 years later. Which I thought this is definitely one of those things where I'm glad there was some editor who was able to work with him and be like, dude, this sucks. Take this out. But he did reinstate it for his director's cut. He must have thought that was amazing or genius or something.
This is what we call a rare movie studio W.
Right. And then, according to Wikipedia, another major scene that was cut, I don't really remember this one that well, but it said that test audiences didn't like it, and it involved 3 guys talking into a speakerphone to get a search warrant as Toshi and Armstrong talk to the police department captain about their case. So I guess, I don't know, I forget if it was intercut or if that's happening in the background and these 3 random guys are talking on a speakerphone. Anyway,
so these are all things that were in the cut that you saw, yes. And you don't even remember the speakerphone scene.
I don't remember the speakerphone scene, so clearly it wasn't necessary. I remember the blackout scene because I was just like, what the
clearly
hell is this?
2 minutes of black screen that's wild. So there's not really that many big, like, it's worse, but it's not really all that huge of a difference for the director's cut. Go
ahead.
Do you know what was included in the 3 hour and 7 minute cut?
Let's see. I was trying to see if I could find something. Let's see. 3 hour cut of Zodiac. Let me see if it says sequences that show.
Isn't it crazy that we live in a time when, like, it's pretty common for a big name director to release a 3.5 hour movie? Like, it's funny, like, they're talking about how this movie's too long, and we were just last year talking about, Killers of the Flower Moon being 3.5 hours long. Scorsese's last film was that long. We've got it's just funny how times have changed, I guess. Like, having a super super long movie is just kind of regular now.
I can't find what the I guess extended sequences were about, but my guess is just like I said, based on the fact that we know David Fincher is accomplished at what he does. My guess is there was probably more interconnecting stuff happening between those three segments that made it not feel as disjointed. That's what my guess is. There was probably more of what Robert was doing in the background, because his descent into madness happens kind of like super quick. Like the obsession's there from the beginning, but it's like we go from that, then we leave him for a while, then we come back and he's having his kids read police files, you know? Like, clearly there's something missing.
That's the other thing that feels kind of disjointed is, and again, something that I think probably blindsided a lot of audiences is that, again, he was marketed as the protagonist, and his life is kind of glossed over in the film, because there's that whole cool little scene where he meets his wife, or like, you know, his, I guess, second wife, like the one, he's on a date and he's talking about how he is kind of investigating the Zodiac, and then they end up going back to his place and not having sex, and instead, you know, like working on the case. Yeah. And she's just like, oh, this is the best like first date I've ever been on.
Yeah.
And like the next time you see her, it's just her being, I'm concerned about you. You're doing too much of this. And it's like, I you know, haven't seen you in forever. Like his whole, and that too, like obviously he is getting too involved in you know, solving the case, but it just feels kind of glossed over. Like she's there and then she's leaving him. And that's like something that could have been expanded on. Again, I think that is one of the reasons that this initially didn't go so well, is like the average moviegoer needs that person to latch onto. And I think Jake Gyllenhaal was supposed to be that guy, and I think he could have been that guy. He was kind of the most interesting character, just because he's like very quirky, and you know, the fact he's a cartoonist, like that's so cool and crazy, and I forgot that detail until watching it this time, because it's been like 5 years.
I was just like, thank God he's not a writer this time. Usually any time that something happens, it's always a self-insert of the writer. He's a writer.
Right? It's just so interesting, like what a weird random person working at this newspaper to just get really, really involved in this case. But that's the problem, right? Like there is no protagonist. It's all just, you know, we're following this character now. Oh, well, their time is done. I guess we're following this character now. I think it's probably the most glaring issue with the movie. Because again, it's like, it's hard to care when I said it earlier, it feels like a documentary that's being acted out in front of you instead of being told in interviews.
Like, I will say, with Jake Gyllenhaal being, you know, promoted as the protagonist of the film, I will say, though, that I think of all three characters, I feel like Toshi's the one that has the most complete and fulfilling storyline.
Yeah.
And I think that's just because he pops up a few more times in Robert Graysmith's storyline. So he does kind of get more of a closure than like Paul Avery does. Because Paul Avery, I mean, we knew he had a drinking problem, but it was just like, it was once again, it was like 0 to 100. It was like, you know, he was just like an off drinker. And then all of a sudden he's like living on a boat like a hippie. I was like, I wanted to see more of that progression from there to there. So
it's also wild. It's crazy to me because this is pre-Iron Man. There, it's so interesting. There was like this period of time that Robert Downey Jr. was sort of like a black sheep of Hollywood. Like he'd gone through his whole drug abuse thing. But what was weird, and I remember this because I remember seeing him in a couple of movies before his big breakout as Iron Man. But every time I saw him, I was like, this guy's a really good actor.
Yeah.
You know? And he was, like, before his whole drug thing, like, he'd been nominated for Oscars. He played Charlie Chaplin, all this other stuff. But and it was all kind of like when I was a little kid is when that stuff was happening. So I was watching him. I didn't see this as a kid, but I was watching like Charlie Bartlett was one that I believe he did right before Iron Man, and I was just like, why isn't this guy okay, so what? He had a drug problem at one point. Like, why is no one taking notice of this guy? And that's like an interesting thing too. Is like he's gotten back into acting. Hey, shout out to Barbenheimer. He won an Academy Award last year for that movie.
Was that his first Academy Award?
It might be. He's been nominated multiple times, but I think that might have been his first win. I'd have to look that up. But it's just interesting how this also came out in that period of time where Robert Downey Jr. was like respected, but also like people were keeping a distance from him. Like, oh, you can be in these movies, but I don't know. It's crazy because that movie is Iron Man. I'm talking about is like seen as his big redemption,
right?
But I always thought that was so strange because like he was great in a lot of stuff before Iron Man. I guess you just needed to make $1 billion for people to respect you.
Yeah.
But
oh, I wanted to talk to you about a little bit more about the cinematography here because you're a cinematography nerd. One of my favorite techniques that you in this film, and I want to know if you caught up with this, is in the first half of the movie, anytime a character that could potentially be perceived as vulnerable meets someone for the first time, you don't see their face. Their face is cut off. And I don't know if you like the most obvious example would be when Robert Graysmith meets his future wife on their first date. He approaches her, so she's sitting down, she's looking up at him, but like the top half of his body is cut off. And I know they did that intentionally to kind of, since nobody knew who the Zodiac was, I think it was supposed to be he could be anyone, and I really like that technique that they did that.
Okay, no, I see what you're taling about. It took me a second. I was like, what do you mean by that? That's no, I didn't notice that, but shoot, now I want to go back and watch because I bet I would pick up on that. That's a cool idea too.
And I think that's before. I think that kind of goes away after they get like their first kind of sketch of what he looks like, because I mean he's still kind of faceless, but I just thought it was really cool. It's like anytime like a character meets somebody new, you don't see their face, and I thought that was such a great thing to do with the cinematography. I thought that was incredible. Poor guy.
No, that's genius.
Passed away because I feel like he had a lot more work in him, but just to do that, I thought that was chef's kiss.
I guess what I can really say as far as that, first off, I agree with you that whole like cutting off, so you're not seeing who is approaching the vulnerable party. Mm-hmm. That's cool. I did not notice that, but I need to keep that in mind next time I see the movie because that is very smart. But as far as the camera, I think my takeaway is I like that in a time when it was a heated debate whether it was cool or not to even have digital cameras for cinema, quote unquote, especially with the theme of our show being anti-pretentious.
Right.
I think again, Fincher is not one of those directors who really seems, I've never gotten the vibe from him that he has a massive ego. Mm-hmm. I don't really hear him talking about his genius. I do think it's really stupid that he had a 2-minute black screen thing, but I think it's kind of neat that in a time when people thought it was like sacrilegious essentially to shoot things digitally, that he did use a digital camera for this film. That's kind of cool.
Right. And what's also interesting is he wanted, unlike a lot of prestige films, he wanted to have like the soundtrack. He didn't want to have like a composer. He wanted the soundtrack to be made entirely of like music from the time period, like audio cues and stuff like that from my thing, which is interesting.
That's cool.
Except when they were editing, they were like, we kind of do need some music here. So he ended up bringing in David Shire, who I mentioned previously, who composed a total of, for the as long as movie is, a total of 37 minutes of music.
When I saw this in a film class, this is kind of neat and goes into what you're saying. So, a teacher's assistant used this film as an example for what diegetic and non-diegetic sound is. And for anyone listening who is interested, and has never heard those terms before, diegetic is when the sound or music is coming from the environment. So you've got a scene where people are listening to the radio, and that's diegetic. Non-diegetic is score, like music, being played that the characters can't hear, but the audience can hear. And hilariously, the TA, it was the opening scene of this movie where they're, going out, because that whole scene is scored with the radio from the car, essentially. Right. So that is a cool idea. And it kind of leads into that sort of style, because that is a creative way to score a scene.
Yeah.
And there are other examples of that too. I don't know why my head's going to this, but there's like the torture scene from Reservoir Dogs where he's playing like pop hits while he's cutting off the ear of a police officer.
Is that the Hip to Be Square song?
Well, that's another example. That's American Psycho, but still, that's another example of diegetic score, kind of. But yeah, like that is interesting, and you do need a little bit of atmosphere, tonal music, like maybe not even a full score, but just some like ooh in the background or something for some of the scenes. I like that creative decision though.
The composer did say that of the music he created, there's only 12 distinct tones in it, which he did on purpose because there's only 12 signs of the Zodiac. So I thought that was fun. But I will disagree with the Sight and Sound people. I wouldn't call the tone of this movie mundane. There's mundane stuff happening, but I feel like it takes off and running pretty quickly, and it's pretty tense. And I do feel like the sequences where it's not tense is a problem with pacing and not on purpose. That's just my take. I wouldn't describe the tone as being mundane at all.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. I think there is mundane aspects to it, but not in the sense that it's dull.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say the tone is mundane. Like, so there's moments where it has that cool, moody cinematography I really like, with the dark, the high contrast, like shadows versus like hard light and stuff like that.
Right.
But as I said, like 50% of this movie is daylight, or it's in, fluorescently lit newspaper offices and stuff. And again, it kind of makes me wonder if maybe that was like the decision with the digital camera as well, where maybe this is a true story, right? And maybe there was kind of an aspect of trying to make it feel mundane in the sense that it's real life.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing too, like everything in this film is very, very intentional. Mm-hmm. Like you just said, that's crazy that there's 12 tones because of the 12 signs of the Zodiac. But, as I said, there is very, intense, moody cinematography in certain places, but then there's just like very flat shots of like these offices and things like that. So it's obviously intended to look that way.
Right.
And that's something too, like I do like very creative and interesting cinematography. You need to know when to use it.
Yeah.
Like everything can't just be like crazy all of the time, unless like that's the vibe you're going for. With this, I think that the type of stuff that I really like is kind of more, it hits different because it's not consistently like that for this movie. It's very
well. I will say this. I guess the studio was very concerned at the lack of action sequences in this movie, and I was just like, we don't need action sequences. I was very confused by that, but I guess several other studios were, when I guess we shopped in, they were disturbed by the lack of action sequences also, and I was just like, I really don't think it needed any to make it interesting or tense, but that's just me. I'm strange.
I'm just like thinking of that scene of the couple just getting stabbed to death and pairing that with there's not enough action in this movie. Or the taxi driver getting his head blown off. Like that's just a funny thing to say for a movie like this. Like why aren't there more car chases?
Right? It's like and I think it has to also with the fact that they both wanted to be as accurate as possible, as they could get it. And there was like one close call, but they didn't know that was that person was the Zodiac killer, so they wouldn't have chased him. So there was no need for car chases unless you wanted them to chase each other.
So again, I forget if it was this year or last year because this year has felt like 5 years. But so they think they've narrowed it down to who the Zodiac is. And I think it was the guy who used to work at the school. I think that's who everyone's kind of...
Oh, Arthur Lee Allen?
Arthur Lee Allen. I think that's what a lot of people have settled on. I guess you are the big true crime nerd of the two of us. I enjoy true crime, but not nearly to the same extent as you. Who do you think is the Zodiac, T? Do you think it's Ted Cruz?
Oh my god. So I actually have never made up my mind as to who it is, because anytime somebody brings up somebody viable, there's enough conflicting evidence with what we do know to be true that we can't ever actually confirm them. Now, Arthur Lee Allen has brought up as probably the one that most people think is the Zodiac, but we don't really. It's one of these things where it's almost like impossible to prove now, because there was some bungling of things originally, and the fact that everybody got super territorial over whose case it was, and they didn't share any information, that a lot of like stuff that would have been distinct that could have, for sure called somebody out, we no longer have. There's also been things like there's questions as to whether if even the person who even killed the people is also the same one who wrote the letters. I mean, most people do believe that he did, but there's like, which ciphers are actually his and which ones were copycats? Like, we have trouble narrowing all that down. And so it's very, very hard to get a lot of the timelines to line up. But Arthur Lee Allen, I think, is the one that, for the most part, I believe the majority of people have said checks the most boxes.
He seems it's funny, like the other thing that was kind of fun rewatching this, I'm not a true crime person to the same level as you, but like as I was watching the movie, I kind of had my phone out and I was sort of looking at stuff from the case, just because I was like, oh, that's right, this guy, and I feel like he makes the most sense to me.
With like,
again, like there's inconsistencies obviously, but just like stuff from his personal life.
Well, the big thing with him is with one of the few tangible clues we have from the Zodiac being the handwritten letters and his handwriting not matching.
Because he's ambidextrous, right?
He's ambidextrous, but there's questions as to whether the people who did the original analysis really knew what they were doing, and there's a lot of stuff that was mishandled with this case that kind of made stuff very, very difficult to determine this. I feel like nowadays this would be more of an open and shut case, but back then, like I said, there was some problem, but like he was smart enough to split it up because he knew that there would be a territory war over whose case it actually was. But what was interesting, what was fun fact, do you remember the movie from when you were younger called Catch That Kid?
I do, and I'm trying to remember if I ever saw it.
It had let me see, who was it? I remember that used to be one I watched a lot. It was on a lot, but the reason I bring it up is I think Kristen Stewart was in it. I'm pretty sure she was in it as a younger person. But what I thought was interesting about that is the good guy in that movie is Arthur Lee Allen in this movie, which I was like, that's wild.
Oh yeah, no, that actor I recognized him immediately. He's one of those, again, character actors are cool, man. They get steady work, and you always recognize them, and you're like, oh, what else were they in? And it's funny, and I mean, it's kind of because they say it. The people who witnessed the taxi driver murder, they say it perfectly. Like, oh, what did he look like? Just some guy.
Yeah.
And that's why because that actor usually plays like very nice people.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what's so scary about the Zodiac is he's just some normal looking dude, at least according to the witnesses who saw him.
Yep.
So, I guess the last thing I kind of wanted to discuss, not in the same vein as, a while ago, we did the whole retro revival thing, and at least in my opinion, your pick was not a retro revival. This is kind of an interesting one, right? Because, like, we settled on this. I'm not going to say, like, oh, we shouldn't have picked this movie, because I do think it has some neo-noir elements to it. But, like, it's kind of a hybrid, right? Like, we've been saying it a couple of times through this review, but it almost isn't really a neo-noir as much as it's almost like a documentary. Like, it has moments where it's that moody cinematography that I was talking about that he uses sparingly. Usually when there is a tense moment, there's the bit where Avery goes to like Riverside to meet with that character, and there's kind of moody lighting there. There's obviously the times when Gyllenhaal and the cop are like meeting at that location, and that actually happens to be in Koreatown.
Yeah.
But it's so like there's like elements of neo-noir. Yeah.
I looked up like what neo-noir is, and so I wrote down some stuff that I thought, really kind of played into it. One of them is the conflicted anti-hero, which I think all of them except for Toshi really come across as very anti-heroic, and specifically Jake Gyllenhaal's character is the conflicted anti-hero. Desperate decisions. We're talking about him essentially giving up his family to solve this case, or try to. There's the politics of it all. And when I say politics, I don't mean like we think of politics, but like the balancing of all the stuff between the police stations and who can do what and who can talk to who. Then there's physically, visually, there's the low lighting, the use of light and shadow a lot in it, and the feeling of paranoia in the film. And so that really does show up specifically as you talked about the basement scene. I really, because I've watched that a few times, and I kind of of the opinion that he got into his own head. I don't think there was actually anyone upstairs. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that really kind of plays up with
what's
the
scary. I think what's scary about that scene is just what a stupid pickle he put himself in.
Right.
Like throughout the scene too. Like, why would you follow him to the basement? And the gut punch kind of line of dialogue in that scene is but I drew the posters.
Yeah.
So it's like, bro, you might be in the house of the Zodiac killer, and you did not tell anyone you were coming here. No one, like, just the danger he put himself in if the guy was the Zodiac is what's scary. And that's kind of, like you said, paranoia. Just, you don't know. And I don't think there was anyone upstairs either. And I don't even think that character was the Zodiac, but just like that. And also even just kind of announcing to the potential Zodiac, that you think whoever drew the posters is the Zodiac. Like, so now the guy realizes that you think that it's him. Just, right. So maybe he isn't even as...
No one knows you're here. Maybe I could just get rid of you.
Exactly. Well, and that too, like, also, like, maybe he's not the Zodiac, but maybe he, this guy knows cops. Like, you could get murdered by someone just because they don't want to be called the Zodiac. It's... Ugh. But yeah, no, that... There's like moments of it being neo-noir. And again, I think it's kind of the overall problem with this movie. Like you said, it's very disjointed. And I think that it kind of lacks a protagonist. It lacks a consistent like tone. And it lacks... And it's not something that is like, it doesn't upset me because a lot of the jumbled mess of it kind of comes from them trying to cover all their bases. And I think a lot of it comes from all the research they did and the fact that they're not trying to be accusatory of anybody and just all of these things that they're trying to accomplish with the movie that they're making. But it is kind of turned the film into a Frankenstein's monster, like, or not a Frankenstein's monster, a collage. You know, it sort of lacks vision, and where it is like a very good, and I think, you know, film people like this movie now, but I feel like a lot of its resurgence, as you said, is with true crime people, and I think that's who this really appeals to, is the people who really just, you know, gorge themselves on the details of these cases, because that's where its focus is. It's on solving the case. It's not about the murders. It's about who did the murders and how they found out who it was. Well, you know, even though it was unsolved at the time.
Well, according to Wikipedia, Fincher felt that his job was to dispel the enduring mythic stature of the case by defining what was fact and what was fiction, which is also what I think is really important in defining and standouty about this movie, is the fact that it does spend a lot of time making sure you know what the facts are, and, you know, kind of like, it does take the time to, especially with certain suspects or certain things that have come up over the years that people have talked about, it does take the time to like kind of like go down that route, and this is kind of what makes it long, and then disprove it. Now, before we go though, I wanted to say one thing is, I guess, David Fincher, first off, where is Marin County?
That's a good question. Marin County. I don't know.
Well, what about
I don't know.
San Anselmo?
I am not sure. What does this have to do with? Is that where he's from?
So he is from San Anselmo in Marin County, which looks like it's in the county looks like it's the county that's just north of San Francisco. Like, the Golden Gate Bridge crosses from San Francisco into this county. So he is...
Oh, wait, okay. Yes. No, this is... Okay, I know where this is. This a lot of... It's sort of a yuppie area. It's a very, very wealthy kind of, almost... if I understand it correctly, I think it's kind of like a suburb. Like, It's outside of San Francisco. It's north, and I've actually never been there, but I know people who have been there. I know, for instance, I believe that's actually where George Lucas lives, unless I'm mistaken. But also, that's like where Ed Catmull is from, who's
right,
like one of the founders of Pixar. And I think that's actually where Pixar Studios is located, is in Marin County. So, like, it's a very affluent area.
Well, it says that David Fincher's from that area. And so he said he is quoted as saying, because I guess he was a child during this time. He says, "I remember coming home and saying the highway patrol had been following our school buses for a couple weeks now, and my dad, who worked from home and he was very dry, not one to soft pedal things, turned slowly in his chair and said, 'Oh yeah, there's a serial killer who's killed 4 or 5 people who calls himself Zodiac. He's threatened to take a high-powered rifle and shoot out the tires of a school bus and then shoot the children as they come off the bus.'" So that's kind of where his interest in the Zodiac began. But I just kind of thought that was funny that he did sort of kind of experience the, some of the effects of it.
It explains his passion, because, you know, regardless of what you think of this film, just the amount of attention to detail and everything, like, I know if you asked David Fincher what some of his favorite films he's made would be, I don't think he cares what critics think. I think this is probably at least in his top 5. I wouldn't be surprised if he said that this was his favorite film he ever made. Right. Because, like, even without knowing all of the research that he did, I could tell that he cared about the material in this film a lot.
Yeah.
But that is interesting, and I think I remember hearing that he had grown up in the area and stuff. But that is...
First off, the dad is absolutely wild for just telling her child that just straight out. Like he doesn't. I don't think he said how old he was when that happened. But I'm just like, what if he was like 10? You know, I don't know. Like,
Right?
you just tell your child, oh yeah, you may get murdered on the way home, but you know, we've all kind of come to terms with it.
I mean, he said his dad was dry, but yeah, no, that is a neat thing. So I guess that leaves off what we think. What would you rate this movie, T?
Okay, I love this movie. However, it has its issues, and the last time I did watch this, I watched this with some friends, so I got to see their reactions to stuff. I'm gonna give it probably a 2.5 out of 4 pitchers of sweet tea, just because I do think there's some major pacing issues. There's some like you talk about tonal issues and disjointed issues, and the fact that even when I was sitting there watching it again, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot we haven't gotten to this part of the movie yet. You know, the fact that like it's not coming to me as like one solid connected work, and I'm like, oh, we're entering this. I forgot that we had this section here of the film. You know, it's like already in my brain, I've already divided it up. Like it doesn't even to me feel like one solid movie. Like I feel like this could be a solid, if they put all the extra footage in, a solid miniseries for 3 nights in a row. But yeah, but I do really enjoy this movie, and I do think it's very, that with those issues aside, it's very well made and very well acted.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to be a little nicer to this. I think it's a beautiful mess, and I think that if someone recut it or just changed it up a little bit, it could be a lot better. That being said, like it's got its problems. I'm going to give it a 3. I feel like it's also one of those things where there's a lot of cool creative decisions that you kind of illuminated for me throughout this, like the, you know, cinematography choices with again, I'm amazed I didn't notice that before with the whole not revealing the person's face when there's a vulnerable character.
Yeah,
that's cool. As well as just things like, you know, maybe it wasn't necessarily the best decision or very practical to try and score the movie only with, you know, hit music of the time, but these are decisions that can lead to an innovation in filmmaking, and I think that's kind of, it didn't hit the mark, unfortunately, but I think it's things like these that are kind of making it become a movie people are looking back on fondly, despite its problems. Because I remember when this came out, it was kind of overlooked. Like, it was hyped up, and then it just sort of came and went. So the fact that I'm seeing it talked about,
issue too.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, like, it's interesting that it's becoming talked about in film school again, or just, you know, by people who enjoy movies, and that it's got kind of this newfound fan base from the true crime community. It's not a film that's perfect. It's not necessarily even like the best film for a filmmaker or someone who appreciates that medium the best. But it's, I think, got more to like about it than to not like. And I do think, despite it's probably like, it's in the top 5 Fincher movies, but it might be number 5, like under a few other movies. So I'm gonna be a little nicer, just for the sake of not completely copying you. I have a lot of the same issues with the movie, but I'm gonna give it a 3. Be the nicer of the two. Well, but like, what do you guys think?
I would just add really quick. I think one of the reasons why I went a little bit lower than you did is because this is very easily a movie. This is very easily a background noise movie. And I mean that to where, like, there's a lot going on. And it's very well stuff, but the reason I say that is because you don't have to really, there's a lot of extra in it where you don't need to like be focusing on it to fully get everything with which is weird with as complex as the story is, that you're able to do that with it. So that's kind of also why I said that. But what do y'all think?
What do you think? Right? If you are listening to this on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment. We like to check out, you know, whatever you guys have to think. We also are open to taking suggestions for reviews. If there's a movie someone would like us to talk about, you guys can check us out on our socials, which who knows if that's even going to be like, I don't know if we're switching to Blue Sky, what the deal is with that. But you should check us out on X, the Everything app, or our Stitch. What's Stitches? What's the Facebook one?
Close.
Anyway,
Thread.
And Thread, that's what it is. And yeah, and if this is the first episode you're listening to, we have a whole backlog. There's a very good chance we were talking about a movie that you like that, you didn't realize. So definitely check it out. We've got our finale or premiere, depending on, I guess, when it comes out. But we got our famous drinking game episode where we review every new movie of 2024 coming out next. So until then, I have been Whiskey.
I've been Sweet Tea.
Keeping it Kino.
And suck it, Scorsese.
See y'all next time.
Bye.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.